Vande Gujarat.
Good afternoon, friends. Myself Pratik Vora. I am associate with Intas Pharmaceutical as Associate Vice President Regulatory Affairs. I have a total 18 years experience in regulatory affairs. So just I want to say what is the regulatory affairs and what is your career option for future. Now, pharma regulatory affairs is a career options, and nowadays is a very promising field in pharmaceutical field. So I just brief what kind of options is available. I'm going to speak about the pharma regulatory, what is actual pharma regulatory affairs, why drug regulatory affairs is required in pharmaceutical field, the need of RA professions, role of regulatory affairs professionals, job profile, future growth aspects, as well as the desired quality. What kind of quality is required as a regulatory affairs professions? As you know, pharma regulatory affairs is a profession which acts as an interface between pharmaceutical industry and drug authority across the world. As for particular for a pharmaceutical product, you cannot start commercial activity without approving your product then respective countries. So regulatory affairs is a liaison between the Ministry of Health versus the pharmaceutical company for individual all pharmaceutical products. Regulatory affairs is a honest and reputed professions. Drug regulatory affairs deal with the pharmaceutical products, ensuring compliance with the regulations and law pertaining to the business, availability of the safe, efficacy, and quality pharmaceutical products. Drug regulatory affairs is a dynamic and challenging field for pharmaceutical industry. It is affairs between the competent authorities and the applicant to manage your life cycle of the products. So life cycle of product is a big terminology, starting from the development to product approval, and after product approval is also pharmacovigilance activities required. So regulatory affairs is associated with all these activities. In present regulatory scenario, company required expert regulatory activities to manage the product life cycles. RA experts are qualified professionals to provide right solution to the technical problems under the laws and regulations. Now, if you see early 2000 and 2000 up to 2004, there was no specific regulatory affairs department available in any pharmaceutical companies because quality assurance play a role for regulatory affairs. But subsequently, the drug development and commercialization is highly regulated, and pharmaceutical industry found the needs of regulatory affairs. The path of drug registration is laid down with the good intention but can be complicated. Daily things change, and the constantly Ministry of Health is expecting from the new regulations to gather all this relevant information in one umbrella to bring the product in the market for the sale. Recently, if you see in pharmaceutical field, elemental impurities is a big terminology nowadays for pharmaceutical field. So regulatory affairs professions responsibility to identify what exactly Ministry of Health is expectation from the industry and what kind of current practice available in the pharmaceutical field. In short, common umbrella is required to have a regulatory affairs. RA within the department, if you see in industry, regulatory affairs is personnel is required, B.Pharm and M.Pharm candidate is required in a project management, legal, pharmaceutical sciences, process validation, statistics, medicines, commercially available different marketing authorizations, new clinical and clinical developments. These all area regulatory affairs experts is required because each and every section has their own regulations and their own guidance, how to interpret it and what kind of expectation from the Ministry of Health as well as the pharmaceutical need along with the patient's compliance and safety and efficacy. Regulatory affairs profession is very important. If you see the different flavors in regulatory affairs to fit, if you see in Ministry of Health, European agencies, they also need the pharmaceuticals experts in regulatory affairs. European agencies also require regulatory affairs professionals. Organic component for each and every pharmaceutical companies, they need regulatory affairs. Big pharma company, small and medium scale pharmaceutical companies, trade associations, regulatory CROs, contract research organizations, they need pharmaceutical regulatory affairs experts, and contract manufacturing. These all area regulatory affairs professionals is required. So if you see, the challenges are also big associated with the B.Pharm and M.Pharm. During the study you just only understand about the what is a curriculum and what is the ACTD, but once you start the regulatory affairs professions, you need to aware about the what exactly need for the regulatory agencies as well as the interpretation of the guidelines. If you see the regulatory affairs in QA, that is called as a compliance, nowadays is also big demanding field for pharmaceutical field, because not only the commercial activity is important, but that compliance with the FDA expectation, that is also equally important. If you see RA, regulatory affairs associate with the CMC, means quality manufacturing and quality compliance, means that is called as the heart of any product registration activities. This is called as a CMC. Labeling activities also pharmaceutical regulatory affairs professional is required. RA, corporate is also associated with all these activities. Global RA is a big terminology. In simple word, with the local FDA, they want form 26 is required, form 10 is required. Same way certificate of pharmaceutical product is required for the local FDA submissions. These all complex activity regulatory affairs professional is required, and their expertise is equally important for pharmaceutical field. What is the different professionals available in audience employment, like as an industry, pharmaceutical or biotech, others, regulatory authorities, CRO and service provider, and company structure. Company structure for global as well as the regional activities, regulatory affairs professionals and experts are required. What is the role main regulatory affairs in professions? Regulatory affairs professionals is interact between the health authority all over the world for the registration of medicines, as well as the keep tracking of what kind of new regulation is coming. Because if you see, some product has already been approved in 2010 and 2015, even though if in current date FDA's expectation is something different. So what will be the gap between the old approved product in 2010 or 15 and what is the current expectation from the FDA? That regulatory affairs experts is required to identify the gap analysis between these two. Organization structure, or what kind of organization regulatory affairs professional is needed? Small or medium size, global regulatory affairs, regional regulatory affairs, local regulatory affairs is also required for because nowadays FDA has started their own operation across the globe, and this all globe regulatory affairs professional is required. Manufacturing site mainly compliance of the product and manufacturing along with the ongoing regulatory affairs activities. Drug agencies, CRO, contract research organization, regulatory affairs professionals, experts is required. What is the role of regulatory affairs? Means what kind of application regulatory affairs professional is required to be involved? IND, investigation new drug applications, abbreviated new drug applications, CTO, clinical trial applications, marketing authorizations, and the certificate of pharmaceutical product. These all document, this terminology is very simple, but once you compile, each and every compilation is around thousands or more than thousands pages, and these all compilations write up and what kind of content is required to be captured in all these application regulatory affairs experts and their expertise is required. Now what is a life cycle? As I in initial phase I have mentioned the product life cycle starting from the development. Once you identify, any companies identify the any molecule for any category of the pharmaceutical field, drug development phase regulatory affairs professional is required. And what kind of development, scientific advice, suppose what is the size of capsules or tablet or injections, what kind of color is required to be used for any pharmaceutical product, because each and every company has their own regulation. Some color is acceptable for US, the same color is not acceptable for local FDA as well as the from Europe. So regulatory affairs professional is required to identify which regulation for which country and what kind of component is required to be captured for those development phase. Same way approval phase, during study you might be aware about the ECTD, electronic competent declarations, and these all regulatory affairs experts and their expertise is required. Post approvals, as I said, once product is approved we cannot stop the upcoming new regulation implementations, but the life cycle management and the compliance with the clinical trials and new indications, because if you see nowadays each and every innovator company has started that new indication. indications. So inclusion of new indication is terminology is very simple, but that indication is also associated with some patent and some clinical trial is required. So regulatory affairs profession has to identify what kind of clinical trial that innovator company has done in particular that country, and they liaison with the patent department, okay, whether this indication is patented in that country or not. Regulatory affairs play a crucial role in pharmaceutical industry, involving all stages from starting from the development to the post-marketing applications. Pharmaceutical companies use all the data, and because discovery nowadays is litigation is big terminology for pharmaceutical field, and for litigation huge investment is required for pharmaceutical company, and that is liaison with the patent and regulatory affairs professional, and skill is required. Throughout the development stage, pharmaceutical company has a ability and finally identify their rules and regulations, safety and efficacy of the drug human. In this highly regulated environment, regulatory affairs play a crucial role, not only for interference with the health authority, but the link with the different department in the company, because regulatory affairs is a very crucial role to interpretation of the guideline. Once any new guideline has been published by the ICH or any Ministry of Health, then regulatory affairs profession has to go in depth and summarize the important point of that guideline. They have to communicate within the organization. If their interpretation is required, then they can take approval from the Ministry of Health. What kind of interpretation about this guideline? Regulatory professionals keep working with the authorities and different departments within the companies as well as the outside the companies. Regulatory experts are also ensured to maintain the marketing license. So nowadays is a very big challenge. Once you get approval, if you see nowadays in daily you heard X company has getting import alert from the US, or Y company, and they have got approval in particular for US. So automatically that share price and all these things depending on all this depends on the regulatory affairs skill and expertise. So regulatory affairs word is very simple, but in other terminology associate with the expectation of the Ministry of Health as well as the expectation from the pharmaceutical company, and gap between these two organizations. Now, what kind of challenges and what kind of role once you will be getting a job in regulatory affairs? Once you get a job, then you have some skill of the computer, because daily you need to involve the preparation of the document, approve of the document, as well as the authentication of that document. So that computer skill is required. Fast actions. Once you associate, and fast and quick and precise. These three terminology is very important for regulatory affairs. Once you identify any new guideline, you have to interpret it appropriately as per the Ministry of requirement, as well as the what is the current gap between the industry as well as the what is the gap between the current ongoing pharmaceutical companies. So as you know, some special expertise is required, and this expertise you cannot come overnight. You have to be a habit for reading new guideline, new regulations. All these things is required to be day-to-day activities. You need to have a practice daily to have some regulations. You should start thinking about the what exactly their expectation from the Ministry of Health, what exactly they need, their expertise. This all, it's very important. So regulatory affairs is driving the force. It's a very strategical job. It is you can say future growth of the company is depending on the how regulatory affairs involved in activities. Regulatory affairs professionals is this nowadays, if you see the BPharm and MPharm candidate is a very good in any discipline kind of things, from the starting from the identify the molecules, patent. So in regulatory affairs you should have a master in every department of pharmaceutical field. Master means you should know the patent knowledge, you should know the legal activities, you should know the new regulations for what upcoming in pharmaceutical field. You should know the what kind of paragraph, means some paragraph 1, paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. Different type of paragraph is available for the US. and whether this paragraph according to your drug and according to your exclusivity and that drug, there is all is depending on the regulatory affairs professional skills, is all these things is required. So according to me, as I am associated with this pharma company since last more than 18 years and particularly for in regulatory field for around 15 years, these experts is we really required experts in regulatory affairs field. So according to me, best wishes for the student who is going to be start their career in regulatory affairs. That challenge is also very big, but without challenge you will not get succeed. So from my side, best wishes for all the regulatory affairs new professions. So as I explained what kind of knowledge is required: computer knowledge, read, review and the writing document, then compilation, teleconference, because regulatory affairs profession is involved for the different teleconferences, and deadlines. This is also crucial nowadays. If you miss the bus at appropriate time, then you will be losing, company is losing big loss financially. So deadline is also equally important. Now the regulatory affairs is, if you want to start the career in API pharmaceutical company, active pharmaceutical ingredient, then what kind of job associate with the regulatory affairs professional to filing a DMF, drug master file, issue a letter of access, issue a EDQM filing and obtaining a certificate of pharmaceutical product, assigning the filing and the DMF, taking approval from the API before implementation of any major change in the information about the DMF, pursuing and submitting open part of the DMF, then pursuing an letter of access. Letter of access is a very important terminology in pharmaceutical field nowadays for the API. If letter of access is issued by the active pharmaceutical company to Ministry of Health to access their applications, pursuing their technical package for executing and proper container and container closure system for the API, filing annual and biannual reports, maintenance of the complete history. Suppose in case of active pharmaceutical ingredient, one key starting material, you can say is a KSM vendor is going to be changed. You cannot change as a pharmaceutical product. Immediately you need to inquire with your drug product manufacturer, you need to inquire with the Ministry of Health whether KSM is required to be changed. KSM route of synthesis is also very crucial.